Hello and welcome to Fatten, a podcast where we get into the thick of it. My name is Layla Cameron and I'm an academic, journalist, and artist. Most of my work revolves around body politics and fat liberation. This season, we're exploring what it's like to be fat in Vancouver, a place often referred to as Canada's thinnest city. One of the most familiar fat tropes is the funny fat friend. We all have one. Maybe you even are the fat funny friend. For many of us, it can be easier to laugh at ourselves before the world does, and being self-deprecating is sometimes a useful tool or survival strategy. But as our culture becomes more familiar with the concept of punching up instead of punching down, what does this mean for fat comedians? What does fat positive comedy and performance look like? As a fat performer, Cheyenne Rouleau has had more than her fair share of discriminatory experiences. In this episode, Cheyenne talks about her journey to identifying with the word fat and what it's like to work in an industry whose spotlight isn't always very kind. She gives us a glimpse into her upcoming project that explores all the nuances of the fat experience and even tells us a fat joke.
My name is Cheyenne Rouleau, she, they. I am an actor, creator, writer, producer, just like I wear a lot of different hats in the entertainment industry. I am a queer, fat, feminist comedian, which is a weird place to be in, especially in Vancouver. But yeah, I like to write and create different projects. So I've written everything from screenplays to TV shows to plays to like one act little shows. And I just like to be in sort of every step of the creation process. And it's all comedy, baby.
I can't wait to tease apart your experiences in like all of these different performing arts. But before we get into that, I want to ask you about your identity as fat, how you sort of got there, or your relationship with that word. How do you identify with the word fat?
I joyously identify with the word fat now, and I didn't always. I think I liked to pretend for a very long time that I wasn't fat, or that I was going to change that and I wasn't going to be fat my whole life. And I went through theater school, which was a really horrible place to be a fat woman. And on the other side of that, I discovered this queer fastball team called the Heavy Hitters, who were all identifying as fat and we're all happy about it. And I was like, oh, I can own this part of myself. I didn't realize I could celebrate this without just being the butt of a joke, which was sort of my trajectory. And so I would really say our softball team, the Heavy Hitters, is what made me okay with my fatness.
How did you discover the Heavy Hitters? Also, I am like so honored and happy to hear that the Heavies were your introduction to the fat community, but how did you find us?
It was Facebook. It was like I think it was in Fat Club Vancouver. My friend had sent me a request for that. And honestly, when they did, I was like kind of offended. I was like, what fat club? Like I'm more than just fat. Like I had a lot of weird feelings about it. And then I was sort of in the group, but I was more just like looking in on the group. I didn't really feel part of it. And then I saw, I think it was either you or Amanda or somebody posted saying that want to do this softball team. And I played softball all through my teenage years and my childhood, like quite competitively. And I was dying to be on a team. And so I was like, please, I like messaged right away. I was like, yeah. Like, yeah. And I'm in this fat club. So yeah, I could be on a fat team. Sure. And I was like, it was sort of secondary to my need to want to play softball. And then we started and I found this community, and that was when I started owning my fatness and celebrating it.
I didn't know that. Oh, I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Have you been fat your whole life? And obviously not necessarily identifying with that word, but would you, looking back, say that you've been fat your whole life?
Totally. Yeah. As soon as puberty hit, I went from like a very like up and down childish like boy figure to just like a series of greasy circles overnight. And then I've stayed that way ever since.
Right on. I appreciate that visual. So you would say that you've been fat your whole life. Would you say that you've wanted to be a performer your whole life?
Yeah, for sure.
So how did you marry those two, especially if fat community and fat positivity or fat liberation is new to you? How did those two identities and that desire to be in the spotlight, what was the relationship?
It was a tough one. Yeah, I think I became funny because I'm fat. I think it's like absolutely that thing that was like it was a way for me to get attention and to show my value and my worth, because I learned very quickly that I wasn't gonna get, you know, the ingenue lead roles. Like I was not the pretty girl, so the parts that aren't the pretty girls are usually funny. And so that's what I kind of leaned into. And I think I was really happy being, not happy, but I was really content being the butt of the joke and utilizing my fatness for comedy and for that, because it was the only way I got any sort of validation. So even though it was an unhealthy relationship with that validation, I leaned into it. And I got into theater school, and theater school was awful. I was the only fat person in my class, or fat woman in my class. And, you know, it was already really competitive with female roles. It's like there's such a lack of female roles, especially in the traditional theater canon, which my stupid school like loved. So I just had to sort of fight my way and be funny and hope that there would be like some, you know, big mama Chicago part that was funny for me. And the thing that really sucked about that was that they really wanted to beat the comedy out of me, because they are very like serious theater people, you know, like they study mime in France, like those kinds of people, i.e. the worst kind of people.
I feel like when you think of like highbrow performing arts, I always think of opera. And then I always think about how fat women in particular are incredibly valuable to that art. And it's so amazing to me that on the same stage, you know, fat folks have to use or often use humor as like a coping mechanism to just survive in that industry because of their fatness, because that they, as you said, are not going to be the main role, but maybe they can be the like funny fat sidekick.
Totally. Yeah. It's like sidekick syndrome. I was the fat funny friend, and that was the only way I could get on stage. So I got really good at it. I am so good at being the fat funny friend. Like I got that nailed. And it wasn't till after theater school, when I started writing my own stuff, that I was like, oh, I can do more than just be the fat funny friend. You know, my character can have more depth.
And I think you're getting into that in this new show that you're working on called Fat Joke. And when you told us about it at our last softball game, I was so blown away, and I'm so excited for it, because I think, like you're saying, it's an opportunity to explore all of these different layers to fatness. But I also think it's a way to maintain the humor about it, because as much as we don't want to only be sort of siloed into being the fat funny friend, I also don't want to give up my sense of humor, and I just kind of want to add to it.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. I want to be funny, but I also want people to be like, oh, you're a human being.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what this show is really like trying to play with, is I have so many funny anecdotes from, well, I think they're funny. They're probably traumatic. My therapist will have a lot to say about it, but
it can be both.
It can totally be both. And I really want to like highlight sort of my space in the world and what I've been through, and make it funny, and hopefully people like can take away from the show that, yeah, there is a depth to fatness. And we're not just like surface level funny, and there's a real problem with fat phobia in this industry, but like, look at the people that are killing it.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that you're going to focus on in this new show?
Oh God, everything. I have like a whole list of the different auditions I've been sent on and the descriptors of those auditions, which are just wild. I got called once to a commercial audition, and they told me to wear workout gear. So I was immediately like, red flag. And when it was a group audition, so these like commercials, they bring you in a big group, like you're herding cattle. And so there's like seven of us maybe. And we all had to stand, you know, like we were in a workout class, but I was in the center. They told me to look into the camera like, quote, this time it's going to work.
Oh my gosh. What was it a commercial for?
It was a fitness app.
Oh,
And they don't tell you anything about it. Like, that's the thing about commercials is they just like are like, wear this show up. And so you don't know what you're getting into. So that one, I was just like, oh, I called my agent and I was like, okay, so I don't think I want to do commercials anymore. Like, I for sure killed it, but like, I don't want to be there.
Oh my gosh. Did anyone else in the room, like the other performers, react to that in any way?
Oh no, because they were all thin. They called in, like, they'd have a group of thin people behind you doing the class. And then they had like 4 of us fat people. Like, and it was like friends of mine too. That I was like, I came out of the room and I was like, yo, it's exactly what you think it is, or the before picture.
That's so brutal. And did they want you to just sort of show yourself like floundering and struggle? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they wanted me to struggle. Yeah.
Oh, yikes.
I was like, I can do jumping jacks. What do you think fat people do?
I don't, I think that it is sort of that very narrow vision of what fat people are capable of.
Oh yeah.
Not to draw from like an ableist approach to fatness at all, because like, I don't care if you can do jumping jacks or not, but it's this idea that like you're saying, that fat people can only do certain things, and it just like puts these limitations on the opportunities that someone who's so talented like you are being offered. I can't imagine how depressing that must be.
It's a roller coaster of emotion. Cause like now I'm at a relationship with my fatness where I think it's like pretty funny. But as being a young artist who, at that time too, I wasn't like booking anything. I wasn't on TV shows. I wasn't, this was all I had, being like told that, you're the before picture basically. I was like, I'm not the before picture. I'm the now picture. Like what?
That's so rough.
I got another one for you. You want to hear a real good one?
I'm scared, but yes, I do. I do want to hear another one.
Okay. So it's another commercial. And the premise for this commercial is that we're all the different parts of a sandwich having a board meeting. It's for like meats, I think. It's like sandwich meats. It's funny. I'm a vegetarian, but whatever. It was a meat commercial. And so I got the sides and I was supposed to be bread. And bread was supposed to be the very like analytical, pragmatic, person. Like really, I don't know, like bread.
How you'd imagine a carb.
Sure.
Okay. If it had a personality.
If a carb had a personality. And I was like, great, I love carbs. I could totally do this. So I like borrowed a brown shirt from my friend and came to this audition. And again, it was group. So everybody had their, there was cheese and lettuce and tomato and stuff. And they all had their parts. So they brought us in groups.
Were you the only fat person?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Of course. Sorry.
Always. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I just
only room for one.
There's only ever room for one. Physically, it's small spaces. So they got to be economical that way. So I get brought in with like 5 other people again, and all thin, beautiful actors. And I'm not kidding you. The casting director looks me up and down and goes, you know what? I got something for you. I was like, oh, fuck it. Yeah, great. And they're going to give me like the lead in this. Yeah, like I look really good. I'm brown. And he hands me a new side, and the title of it is Mayonnaise, the fat one no one likes.
Oh my gosh. What was the costume?
I don't know. It was going to be like a bottle of mayonnaise. It didn't matter because it was just an audition, but they were like, this is the part that I want. And then the whole point was that there was a small boardroom table, and there was all these like different foods having the boardroom meeting. And then I as mayonnaise was supposed to try and get in the sandwich, and no one wanted me in the sandwich because I was gross.
It was their way of removing you from the frame.
100%. Yeah.
You're just the hand.
The lens was too tight. I couldn't fit in anyway.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Mayonnaise, the fat one no one likes.
Okay, but the key question to that is, did you get the part?
I wish. I should have gotten that part. I was so committed and good. My friend got the part of cheese. Yeah, didn't get it. So like all that embarrassment, you don't get paid to go to an audition either. Like you don't get anything. So like all of that, and then I just like didn't get the job.
The emotional labor that fat people put in to just move through the world, but then like this is that, I think, kind of times 10 because it's just so blatant in your face.
Oh, I think casting directors are all androids. Like they don't have any humanity left in them. They just see people for like, they get like one impression of what someone looks like, and they're like, yeah, we're going to do that, and you're going to be in that. And like, oh, fat one? Yeah, you're the fat one.
But I kind of feel like that is too complicated for people who work in marketing and advertising to like imagine that maybe if we just treated fat people the same as any other size performer and just like the sandwich thing could be funny if it wasn't playing on like really harmful, oppressive ideology. Like what happened to punching up? That's what I want to know.
I don't know. I feel like it's getting better in a lot of ways in comedy, but I still think fat culture isn't there yet. Like it's not, it is not there for fat jokes. It's not there.
Why do you think that is?
I think fatness crosses like cultural, like racial, language barrier, like everything. Everyone can recognize a fat person. And so I think it's like a really easy joke. It's a really easy joke. Fat people come in like all, colors and makeups, and like every country has fat people. So it's just like an easy, relatable thing, I think. I don't know. And we're so indoctrinated into diet culture and fitness culture, and living in Vancouver. Oh my God. It's like such a part of our culture here. And so I don't think people even realize that like fat phobia is offensive because it's part of who we are here.
Yeah. I think the like dominance of healthist ideology sort of does frame fatness in this way that we don't fully understand fat stigma as being wrong.
Totally.
Because we think it rests on these quote unquote objective truths. And I remember being in spaces that were like explicitly feminist comedy spaces. And inevitably there was always still some type of joke where, yes, it was making fun of diet culture, but the joke was still on fat people or fat bodies. And at first it was really insulting, or at first it was kind of surprising, and now I almost just like come to expect it.
Yeah.
Where unless I trust the politics of, because even especially with fat comics, I am consistently amazed at the willingness to completely dehumanize oneself for a laugh as well. And I'm not a comic. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what the pressures are like, and I don't want to insinuate at all that that's an easy shift to make, but it just seems like there's this persistence on fatness still being the punchline. And I remember like sometimes looking and wishing that I could just say, can you explain that joke to me? I didn't understand it. Can you explain why it's funny? And wondering maybe that's what it takes to create some kind of paradigm shift. I don't know.
I mean, even when I was pitching this show, this fat joke show, the producer is a thin person. And like when they read my script, they're like, I've never thought about any of this. And I was like, yeah, that's a privilege. Yeah, you've never thought about any of it.
That's how privilege works.
That's how privilege works. And like, I think we're, as a culture, we're kind of waking up to other different privileges that we have, like white privilege and, straight privilege is like definitely a thing. But this one is just not talked about. It's just not talked about. And like, I don't know. It's wild to me, but.
Is your show going to be based solely on your experiences? Are you conducting research on, writing other people's experiences into the fold? Can you describe the structure of the show?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not done. So I got a research and development grant from the Canada Council. Thank you, Canada Council, for your money. So I have a year to research and figure out where this show's going. And right now I'm starting with my own experiences because it's an easy place to start with because I know them and they're there and, I think about them all the time. And then I do want to expand a little bit. The genesis of the show was a TED Talk style thing I did for my work. We had this initiative from HR where we were coming back from the Christmas holidays, but we had a week of remote work. And so that week, everyone was asked to make a TED Talk about something they were interested in. And I was so sick of hearing my thin coworkers talk about how fat they felt. I made one about fat phobia. And so I just did so much research about like how racist the BMI is and like just so much stuff. And that it was this like PDF document of just like, shut up. And and then I had this, and then a friend read it, and then another friend read it, and then a theater company called me. So I think, to sum up your question, I really went on a tangent there. It's going to be a mix of both. So I'm starting with my own experiences, but I did a bunch of sort of research about the origins of fat phobia and different terms that we use and like the body mass index and all that stuff. So I have a lot of like academic work there. and I want to integrate into the show, but I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. And I really do want to talk to the community. And one thing that is really great with this project is the company that is producing it, New World Theater. They are creating a group called the Community Ambassadors. So they did this with their last show, Clean Espacios, where they had cultural ambassadors. So people from that community would be able to like come into different like rehearsals and different previews and be like, okay, actually this feels off to me and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to do that, but with fat people for this. So we have some community ambassadors. So yeah, to sum up, I don't know what the show is going to be, but it is definitely going to be funny and loaded.
I think it's really tricky to marry creative interpretation with the need to inform and educate people about these topics.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in the investigate stage of a short documentary film at the moment, and that is literally what that phase is for, is how can I move past this, because I'm an academic, and so I like to cite everything that I say and back it up. And I think I'm also used to, in the spaces that I tend to occupy, having to first like info bomb people with information about that sort of deconstructs those healthist ideologies that they have in their brains, because they won't listen to me talk about the things that I actually want to talk to them about before I deconstruct all of those things. But now that I've moved on to this film project and I really want it to be a creative interpretation of this issue, I don't know how to not do that without including all this information, because I think I fear that people won't take it seriously, they won't listen to it, or they won't get it.
Yeah.
And I don't have the answer for that. I don't think that there is like an approach or framework yet for complex explorations of fatness.
Yeah, no, I don't think it exists. I was really impressed. I was at Man Up last night, which actually you gave me the tickets for.
Yeah, I hope it was great.
It was really fun. Thank you so much. And it was like a musicals theme. And so there was a trigger warning before one of the performers came out and they were doing a song from Hello Dolly. And they're like, just so you know, this has some fat phobic lyrics in it and we don't stand that. And it was a thin host saying it. I was like, what? Like, I was so taken aback that that was a thing, because I'm so used to just like hearing it and no one noticing and no one caring. And I was like, fuck, of course it's the queer community doing it first. Of course the queer community is like, oh, yeah, that's a bad thing. You know, I was like, awesome. But I was like really touched by the consideration, because we don't get that. We just don't get it.
And I especially applaud folks like you who are in these like public facing industries and positions who continue on despite that reality, because it's very, I would almost liken it to, you know, you're removing your skin and you're standing on stage and you're saying, please don't hurt me.
Oh, yeah.
And the chances of you being hurt are probably close to 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to approach that issue or where that even begins to sort of like fade away. But I do think shows like the one that you're working on are a great first step, but B, reflective that we are moving to a space where maybe we can address the complexities of the fat experience. Maybe we can allow moments of fat sadness, or talk about how, you know, fat folks might have internalized fat phobia, or this desire to not be discriminated against and therefore take on responsibility to discipline themselves or what have you. Because I think for a long time, sort of like the energy of our softball team, right? Like, we're a fats only space and we are very protective of that space and we want to make sure it's a very positive space, but no one moves through the world in a completely positive experience.
No.
Right?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's been interesting talking about this, because I feel like this is the first time that I've taken my art into that space where it's like actually like real trauma and dissecting, you know, my own internalized fat phobia and like my own experiences in this without, you know, it is very much like standing naked on the stage and being like, all right, throw at me. I think my therapist would say it's like masochistic, like self-harm, which is like not untrue, you know, like.
But we're so good at disassociating. We've done it our whole lives, so it's fine.
So good. I am also ADHD, like neurodivergent. I can disassociate like no one's business. That's why I'm not an academic.
Hey, I have ADHD
Do
and
you?
I just fake it.
Oh,
So,
nice. Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's a learned skill.
Yeah, it really is. And you know what? The more you practice it, the better you get at it.
That's great. That's great. Oh yeah, it's like you know, putting yourself, for me it was like putting myself as the brunt of the joke. It's like it stings once, but then also, oh, thin people like laughing and smiling with me, like, oh, the dopamine. Like I'm in, like even if they're laughing at me, at least like they're looking at me, you know, they're acknowledging my existence. Like
I remember when I was a kid, I must have read somewhere, or maybe there was some comedian who made this joke that they wanted to be the first fat comedian to live past the age of 35. And I remember, I think I was like 6 or 7, like I was little. And I went downstairs and I repeated it to my parents to make them laugh. And instead of laughing, my parents kind of looked at me and they were like, that's just factually incorrect. And they started listing all these fat comedians who were over 35. And I was so humiliated that my joke didn't land.
oh, that's a good joke.
But I think it also really points out as well that fat people have existed in the performing arts for a very long time. And if you think about musicals, the characters that I was always drawn to were the like campy characters who were also fat. Like fatness was central to their role. And I think it's so interesting that fat stigma is like so pervasive that even though those characters are often the most beloved, you still walk onto these auditions and are treated as if you're invaluable or still sort of like the butt of the joke and not central to the storyline or central to the piece.
It's wild. I think a lot of fat phobia has to do with not necessarily a fear of fat people, but a fear of becoming a fat person. And I think a lot of times fat performers are kind of looked at as like, oh, well, they have real tough skin because they've made it in this industry. And like, I don't know, I think people just take us for granted in a lot of ways. And because it is so hard to make it, when you do make it, people just assume that you have that sort of tough skin. And so they say whatever they want to you. And it's like, it's not that simple. I wish it was that simple, but it's really not that simple. Like even looking at like, I mean, I hate to bring it up, but like looking at people like Rebel Wilson, who, you know, has gone through a big weight loss recently, you know, and she got her break in a role called Fat Amy. And it feels like such a betrayal. Like, you know, it's like, I was like, Fat Amy, like, that's great. There's like a character that like owns their fatness and is funny. And then there's this, you know, person that's making it in the industry. And then it still gets in there. It's still insidious. It's still like, you have to lose the weight. And I mean, I'm not going to speak, everyone loses weight for their own reasons. And I think that's part of body neutrality is like to not talk about it. But I think when it's a celebrity that is especially in the same, is doing the thing that you want to do, and you're like, oh, that gives me hope that like somebody can like use their fatness and own their fatness and be known for their fatness and also be respected, is no longer, and now has a like unhealthy relationship to their fatness or former fatness. Feels bad. Feels real bad.
I agree with you that we shouldn't ever comment on people's bodies. Like that should just sort of be the baseline for respectful communication. I do think that talking about public figures who are fat or were fat and the feelings of fat people in response to those shifts also offers a really good opportunity to address some of these complexities, because as much as someone like Rebel Wilson has every right to do whatever she wants with her own body, you know, there are so few culturally respected fat icons that I also don't blame when fat people feel disappointed or, I think disappointed is the word, when eventually that fat icon loses weight and they are no longer fat. And then the ways that they talk about that fatness is also, or that, you know, before body is especially significant.
It's so hard to be a fat person. And I think people don't think about it that way. And like, you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Because like, yeah, I could lose weight and I could probably get way more jobs acting and I would be successful in that way. But I'd be letting down myself or my community, or I'd feel weird about that. But like, also then I have to exist as this fat person, and accept that it's going to be harder. So I know those shifts are so interesting and difficult and dynamic. And I think, you know, there's a lot of like individualism, and you have to respect everybody's sort of decision, but you have to also understand that our representation is so low and so little that when fat communities do see someone who's fat and making it, they become such a hero for us. And it's hard to see that person either get, you know, like, you know, in Rebel Wilson, like all the tabloids are like, she looks amazing and blah, blah, blah. And like talking about the weight loss. And it's like, that's just something I never wanted to have to associate with someone who I thought of as like a fat icon, you know? And I'm not even a huge Rebel Wilson fan. Like, not even an icon to me, but like,
one of the few options that were there.
One of the few options that are there. Yeah. And I'm going to talk about this in the show too, because it's like, I can recognize when I'm having, you know, I talk about the beginning of the show about like what body neutrality is. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to talk about something that absolutely isn't body neutral. And that sucks. I'm working on that myself. Like I of course have some inner fat phobia, and like, that's going to come out. And I want to be able to like talk about it as it comes out and address it. And it's just a complex thing. It's, yeah, we're damned if we do, we damned if we don't. It's hard.
I think it spotlights the pressure on the very few public-facing fat folks to be everything to all of us.
Yeah.
And it's impossible.
That's
You're setting them up for failure.
Absolutely.
I have felt that way as someone whose work is somewhat public-facing, that I have also been like siloed into this one topic. Ugh. And because it is a topic about exploring the experiences of a community that I identify with and I am a part of, sometimes I resent it because it sometimes feels like I've been pigeonholed into this thing that, you know, my success and my focus and all of my projects now have to be centered on this thing. Ugh. But at the same time, you know, anytime I get an email from someone, for example, saying like, oh, I found your website or whatever, and it really was beneficial to me in some way or whatever, to me, I'm like, okay, that kind of makes it all worth it. But I mean, I know you're working on a show that is literally centered around this, but have you felt that way? That totally. It's also, you know, you're turning water into wine, but then also thinking like, oh, I'm only going to have to drink this wine now forever, so to speak. Yeah. And we don't even have the privilege of letting it age to see if we like it. We just kind of have to take it.
And here's the thing. I mean, you know, I identify as a woman. I find this a lot in, especially like the feminist art that I've done. So I kind of got my start doing comedy, doing more. It wasn't really about fatness in any way. This is sort of a new area that I'm going into, but it's always been a really feminist focused. And I just remember being like writing sketches. We did a show called Lady Parts, and I was like writing sketches, and I was like, I don't want them all to be like hitting people over the head with feminism. Like, that's so boring. I think this is, you know, one of the reasons I love my husband so much. He said this to me after my show, the After Party, did really well, and we went on tour. He was like, your show is not feminist because you're teaching anybody anything. It's feminist because you're doing it. And I was like, nice. Like, I want to do art that's like that.
Also, kind of like what you're saying, that we are put in these positions where people interpret us as speaking for a very complex and diverse community that has a lot of experiences that I have no knowledge of and no experience of and no right to speak on.
Yeah.
And I think that also holds back a lot of us who want to engage in more complex conversations and approaches to these topics, because you never want to claim to be speaking for an entire community. And at the same time, sometimes that's the position that you're put in order to be given the opportunities to have these conversations in the first place.
Fully.
And it's so difficult to tease that apart in a way that you can walk away from it feeling good about this thing that you produce. Because beyond all of these conversations about fatness, even just making art is so vulnerable. Yeah. And putting it out there in the world for people to consume and then have opinions on is terrifying. Yeah. And I don't think people even understand that.
Oh, I've been ripped apart in reviews. I've been ripped apart. My show, the After Party, is quite, like, it's not for everybody. It's two drunk teenagers in a park snorting Ritalin and going into their memory portal.
That's not for everybody.
It's especially not for us, like, a lot of older generations come to the Fringe Festival and they just buy tickets. And they don't know what they're buying tickets for. You know, it's a hard show at, you know, noon on a Wednesday for a bunch of people that are much older than you to sell. So I've been called, my favorite one was two idiot buffoons. Oh, that was great. I was like, I'm putting that on my marketing.
That should be the name of your next show.
Oh, absolutely. We actually used marketing for when we did Lady Parts at the Cult, a man called to complain.
Oh,
and then we used his review. The box office person wrote down everything he said, and then we used that to market the show. That was like because he just hated it so much.
But sometimes they can't give it to you.
Oh, I was
right?
like, this is perfect.
Like, this serves me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but it is really fun. I mean, like, I know a lot of artists who will not read reviews, and like, I won't read a review if I'm doing a show that has a long run. I'll read it at the end. I won't read it during it because I don't want it to affect my performance. But I also think like critique is good and necessary in some ways. Like, I mean, theater critics are stupid, but because usually they're like just like older people that failed as being actors or directors that are just there to rip everybody apart and don't understand like a lot of like cultural aspects or like what the show is. But besides that, I think like, you know, being critical is good. You know, we need to be critical in order to grow as people, and we need to be able to, as artists, be able to understand that criticism exists. And you know, sometimes you're going to get called out on your shit, and you got to be able to be like, yeah, that wasn't good. You know, that joke punched down. Like, yeah, you're right. Thank you for calling me out. You need to take it and learn. And it's such an important thing as comedians because we're always like riding the line, you know? There's a lot of riding that line of like, is this offensive or is this funny? Because everything's got to be really present with comedy. It's got to be right in the now. And that's why a lot of comedy doesn't age well.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And you got to be, there's a vulnerability to doing that. Obviously, I'm not condoning people that punch down all the time or are, you know, mean to marginalized communities. But there is something in comedy that does, it is that there is the danger that's involved of like, a lot of comedy is, you know, pointing out the truth of some things, and people interpret that in a punch down way, and that sucks. But when you can like take the truth of something and make it funny and it still be kind of edgy and still be, you know, someone's not expecting, there's like a real vulnerability in trying to do that, and there's a real craft in trying to do that. And yet like comedians are like the first people for people to be like, I hate them because of this. It's like, it's actually like a really vulnerable career choice. Like it's a really like putting yourself out there, and comedy is really hard. I'd way rather write a drama. It's so easy to write a drama.
But is that why you've chosen to go into comedy? Just as a masochist, you wanted to?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. As a complete masochist, I want to do the hardest thing possible. I also want to do the really hard thing and be really good at it right away.
Yeah.
Which is like a huge problem.
And a symptom of ADD.
Yeah. I will only try things that I'm good at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think comedy is way more complicated than people think it is. And especially comedy that intersects with different communities.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to screw up, and people are going to be mad about things. And I know that. But I'd rather try something and maybe have it succeed than not try it at all.
Totally. I think in some of my research on reality television, on representations of fatness, I'm sort of exploring the stickiness of, or the sticky qualities of reality TV. And I think what draws me to it is that it is simultaneously good and bad at the same time. And sometimes it's the bad that makes us feel good.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And so I think that's also kind of what you're getting at as well, is that we can have these sort of cultural texts where it can be so harmful or so degrading or so exploitative or what have you, but still give us pleasure.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that is really powerful.
Totally.
Too.
I love reality TV. Like I Love Is Blind, Too Hot to Handle. Like I love that. And I joke about it, like I love watching Too Hot to Handle because I love watching people that are objectively hotter than I am be just like worse people and be like in a worse place. I'm like, that makes me feel really good. Like I'm doing better than that person, even though they look really good in that tiny bikini. Like,
exactly.
You know? I'm like, I'm winning.
Exactly. No, totally. Or even like, I love watching shows that really do their best to exploit fatness, because I don't think they are aware of the power of framing something as misfitting or as a freak or as abject, that like some of us revel in that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like to some of us, that is our identity and it's like really empowering. And I know that's like that is an alternative reading of these texts. And for the most part, you know, they're just like, you know, at the forefront, an oppressive tool. But there's something to be said about getting joy from even just indulging in plays and musicals and comedy sets that are objectively offensive towards fat people and still laughing at it. I mean, even in my own home, I'll make fat jokes at my own expense. And maybe also part of it is that it's okay if I say it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not okay if you say, or not you, thin people. It's not okay if thin people say it, but like I can say it and it's like funny. But I love watching people. I think people around me, I don't know about you, but since you've like sort of come into a more fat politic, but since being more forthright about that as well, people are hesitant to laugh around me. Like, you know,
totally.
do they look at you first and then see how you respond? Yeah.
Oh, it's my favorite thing doing stand-up where like people are like, I'm not sure if they can laugh. And I'm like, we're here for comedy. Like you can laugh. But I like also like pointing out how uncomfortable people are and then like laughing at them for being uncomfortable. And then they laugh at themselves. And like, you know, I think comedy is like, it brings people together in a lot of ways. You're all in a room laughing at the same thing. And I think it can be that and it can be joyous and people can feel free to laugh at the things, but they need to understand like the complexities of what they're laughing at. And I think bad comedy is easy comedy.
Yeah, that's a really good point too.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, when I started stand-up, like pretty much the only jokes some straight white male comedians had were like, the differences between men and women are like, that is so boring. That is so boring. We've been doing this since the 80s. That is really, really boring and like an easy joke to make because you're playing on stereotypes that everybody knows. So you're not doing anything interesting with it. I like the direction comedy is going with like Hannah Gadsby, where it's like, it's funny because that she's funny or they're funny and they have a interesting intersection of, you know, identities and they're putting themselves on stage being funny, but it's also true and honest and sad and makes you reflect, but it's also like they're giving you the permission to laugh at it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the greatest healers because I don't know if people heal from drama. Mm-hmm. Like it's just like trauma porn to a certain extent, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
There's so much trauma porn out there. And like, I think that's one thing that I'm really passionate about with being a fat actor is like, I just want to play a role where no one talks about my fatness. Mm-hmm. Can I just play a role where like, you can see that I'm fat. This is a visual medium. You know, I'm fat. That's enough. Like, I don't want my storyline to be centered around my fatness because we've done it. It's boring. It's easy. It's really easy to do a thing like, oh, this girl doesn't fit in because she's fat and all the thin people are mean to her. Like, boring. Done. We know that. We can go to any high school and see that. Like, so
and then
boring.
The conclusion is like, and despite her ailments
Totally.
of being fat,
she took her glasses off and boy, was she hot. Like, no. You know?
I think of just laughter as this just, how do I say this without sounding completely cheesy? Like how powerful laughter is in the fat body because you're so used to being the object of that laughter. And I think about our softball team and how someone came up with that cheer where they would lift their shirt up to expose their belly and slap their belly like a seal while chanting heavy hitter. And for the first season, I never did it once because I just wasn't there, which I think I wouldn't have admitted because I was also like the co-founder of
you're
this team,
championing
so I
the
wasn't
team.
gonna say, you know, ever shush it, but I also didn't participate in it. But looking around the diamond and now also participating in it, I love that we are like engaging in a fat joke, especially in a space that is not explicitly, you know, centered around that. It's just our team is that little diamond. And oh God, that was an unintentional softball pun.
I thought you thought about that. Immediately I was like,
I regret that. I want to take that back. But I do, like, I think about those moments where I'm like, oh yeah, we're making fat jokes. Like the team is called the Heavy Hitters.
Oh,
The
I love
dodgeball
telling.
spin-off is the Easy Targets. Like, it's amazing.
It's such a good name.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, well, there's power because we've been robbed of that power. We've been the punchline for thin people.
Yeah.
So we've never had the power of being that person, and I think that's something I do get joy out of, and like I did in theater school, of being like, oh, but if it's okay because I'm doing it, I
Yeah.
can get that power. But I think it's really earned, and it's really it's really special. It's just a really special power.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh God.
Do you have any good fat jokes? Or bad fat jokes, actually?
Oh, one of my favorite ones. Okay. How do you get a fat woman into bed?
How?
Piece of cake.
It's true, I would.
I know, like, who doesn't love cake?
Okay, that was a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah. What would you say to other fat folks who are in similarly public-facing positions or who may want to work in the performing arts and are negotiating all of these tensions about being a fat person?
I think showing up is an act of rebellion in itself. And I think never lose that power of showing up into a space where people have maybe told you or you get the feeling that you're not welcome. Show up every time. Show up every time. Be yourself. Do not apologize for who you are. And eventually, people will get it.
Yeah, I love that. What can non-fat folks do in the comedy scene to make it a little less awful for fat people?
Okay, well, you need to start hiring more fat comedians for your shows, for starters. Obviously, take out the fat phobic stuff in your content, but also call each other on your fat phobic stuff. The green room of a comedy show is something that is very interesting, and sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's an absolute garbage fire. Because comedians really like to be the funniest person in the room, and they fight for that a lot. The bad comedians. Good comedians are quiet backstage. But most comedians are bad, and most comedians are fighting for attention backstage. So call people out when they say fat phobic stuff backstage. Call people out when they say it in their set. And like there is an understanding with comedians because we know how hard it is, and we know that like, yeah, sometimes you're gonna bomb, and sometimes things are gonna land, and sometimes you write a really bad joke, and you're like, oh, I wrote a really bad joke. So it's not about like necessarily like making anybody feel bad, but point it out and be like, you know what? I listened to this podcast with this amazing person, Layla, and about fatness. And I've been learning that, like that stuff kind of isn't cool and is really ostracizing to fat people and like kind of ableist. Don't say that joke. Or like, how can we workshop that so that's not a punch down? It's really easy as someone who's putting yourself in that vulnerable position to reject outsiders' critique because you're like, they don't get it. They don't get what it's like. But we as comedians get what it's like. We get it. Talk to each other, have those conversations. We don't have to use backstage to just like drink and try and be the loudest one. We can use backstage to like talk about these things and make our community better.
I appreciate that identification of this private space to have these conversations. It's not about clout either.
No.
And being the most woke or PC or what have you.
No, we're all going to screw up. Like,
yeah.
We're all trying to make people laugh, and often we're trying to make like normies laugh. And normies are it's just a whole thing, like pandering to like the bridge and tunnel crowd where you're like, I don't know what you think is funny. You probably think gay jokes are funny, and I don't know what to do with that, but I also really need the dopamine of making you laugh. So like it's complicated, it's hard. Most people aren't quote unquote woke. Like, yeah. It's, we are in this age of like, sectioning ourselves off into these different small communities, and you don't realize that like you're actually leaving yourself out of like a really big conversation that's happening,
All right. Well, where can people find out more about you and your work, and how can they connect with you?
Well, I'm not super active on social media because it makes me sad. But my Instagram is Shenanigans, and you can find me there. You can also find Fat Joke. We're going to be doing a preview at the Push Festival in 2023. So like, randomly Push Festival is interested in my show and they haven't even read it. I love them so much. We love Push Festival. So we're doing a premiere in 2023 and then probably a full staging with Push Festival in 2024. You can read more about the show at the New World Theatre website. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I'm sure it can be linked in the comments below in the description. New World Theatre is our producing partner there. And I work at the Havana Theatre, and I do shows there occasionally, and I work for a YouTube channel called Second Besties, so you can find some of my weird comedy stuff there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shy.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. This has been a dream.
This podcast is produced and directed by me, Layla Cameron. Both audio and video versions of this podcast were edited by Ari Conrad Birch. Each interview was filmed and audio recorded by Rami McHale. Additional video was filmed and edited by Felix Naud and directed by ETW Media Productions. The music for this season is by the band Parlor Panther. Funding for this podcast is supported by TELUS STORYHIVE.